Hey, welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. I know I missed last week, and sorry about that. I wasn't feeling well, and I would not have sounded great. As you might be able to tell, I'm still not 100% better, but I'm better than I was, and I owe you an episode about the tower. So here we go. The tower is number 16 in the major arcana, and as you can see from looking at it, it's a doozy. We've got, well, a tower, and it's being struck by lightning. It's on fire, and people are falling out of it, and they're screaming, and there's a crown that looks like it's being knocked off the top of it. All the while, it's against a black, stormy background with these aggressive gray clouds. Oh boy, there's a lot going on here, isn't there? When you look down at the tower's base, you can see it's on some rough terrain. This rough terrain is one of the most common things people point to when they interpret the tower. And rightfully so. It's one of the most important visual components of this image. That rough terrain symbolizes that the foundation underneath this tower isn't totally solid, and that because of this lightning strike, it's crumbling, and that foundation isn't able to support this tower, so we're going to be left back at square one, forced to rebuild. That's really the crux of the tower. It's all about a hard reset. It's the point in the fool's journey where everything you've been taught and you've built upon is now struck down, and you have to start fresh. I briefly alluded to this in the Hierophant episode, where the Hierophant is the one who teaches you all about your culture and the expectations and the mores that you're expected to adhere to, and how eventually you reach the tower and all of those expectations come crashing down. So does that mean that all the things that the Hierophant taught you weren't correct, or that they weren't worth it? Not at all. Pay attention to where both the Hierophant and the tower show up numerically in the Fool's Journey. The Hierophant's number 5. He's fairly early in this journey. Then the tower, at number 16, is all the way on the back end. If you think about how the cards build upon each other and flow into each other, early on, you needed those guardrails. You needed rules and structure to be able to make sense of the world that you were moving your way through. And to get a little bit more specific, the Hierophant comes right after the Empress and the Emperor. So if we want to read that a little more literally, we could say the Hierophant symbolizes how once you get to school and you start mingling with other students and with adults who aren't your parents, you might realize that some of the things that go on in your house aren't necessarily what goes on in everybody else's house. Certain things that you might have thought were normal are actually just a weird little idiosyncrasy of your family. So the Hierophant teaches you what's normal, and then you take and you apply that to relationships, as we see in the Lovers, and so on and so forth. You make your way through the Fool's Journey. Eventually, because we've been studying this for a bit, you ride the Wheel of Fortune, and then eventually you die. But don't worry, you come back, and you meet the devil, and things are kind of wacky now that we're in the upper digits. And through all of that wackiness, that dying, and that engaging with temperance, and that having to ride the Wheel of Fortune, and having to contend with the devil, have taught you that life isn't always as predictable and as grounded as the Hierophant made it out to be. You're experiencing the wackiness in real time. You're seeing where some of those guardrails aren't necessarily going to protect you, and how in some cases they might be hindering you. So think of the tower as both literal and figurative. Literal things can be falling away, like a job or your car dying or something like that, but also figurative things like mindsets. The tower might be the end of a certain way of thinking or a way of expecting the world to be. This is apparent when you pair it with the next card in the sequence, the Star. The tower often gets a bad rap for being a scary card, and as you can see, it's definitely an uncomfortable situation. No one wants to fall out of a tower and have that tower get struck by lightning and go into a free fall where you have no idea where you're going to land. That's kind of like the scary version of the Fool. The Fool is excited about jumping off the cliff and seeing where he lands. These people aren't excited, and who would be? Look at them. But it's important to understand that the tower isn't always a scary or quote-unquote bad situation. We've talked about how there are no inherently good or bad cards, but there certainly can be inherently uncomfortable cards, and this is one of them. The tower is a very abrupt change that you need to find a way to adjust to and live with the new normal. But that change is often necessary, and in a lot of cases, it's inevitable. And even though it's difficult in the moment, ultimately, it's often a necessary, good thing. Here's an example. You're a senior in high school. For the past 4 years, your day has been dictated by a bell schedule. Every day, you arrive at school at about 7:30 in the morning, and you take your first class. You go through the same schedule. Each year it switches up a little what class happens during what period, but ultimately, the routine is the same. You go to class, you do your homework, you hang out with your friends, you eat lunch in the cafeteria, you take tests, you get grades, you get a couple months off in the summer, and then you come back in September. But this year is senior year. When this school year comes to an end, there is no summer break. You're just done with high school forever. And that's ultimately a good thing. That means you graduated. That means you got good grades and you passed all your classes and you've met all the requirements to graduate and move on and up in the world. It's a wonderful thing, but it also means an end to that routine. It's an abrupt change to your day-to-day schedule. There's no more bells, there's no more homework, there's no more cafeteria, and yes, I know if you choose to go to college, those things will make a return, but they're not going to be the same. A college cafeteria is nothing like a high school cafeteria. There are no bells dismissing and starting classes on a college campus like there are in a high school, and the homework and the assignments are a whole lot different. This isn't about college or anywhere else that our hypothetical high school senior might end up later on in their life. This is about the end of their day-to-day schedule as they know it. They're not in high school anymore, and now the world is their oyster. What will they do? One high school senior might join the military and go and be deployed somewhere across the world. Another might go to college, while another might decide to enter the workforce. So let's say you, our main high school character, have now graduated, and you're the one who's decided to go into the workforce. You've always had a knack for graphic design, and you decide to apprentice with the local graphic designer. While one of your friends is off at boot camp, and another is on a college campus, and just for fun's sake, let's say another wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do, and then a few weeks after graduation, fell in love with a man from the internet and moved to Brazil to live with him. All the while, you're back in your hometown, wondering, where do I go next? How do I build the next foundation for this stage of my life? Because everything that I'd been accustomed to, the bell schedules, the pizza in the cafeteria every Friday, the assignments, all of that, none of that's here to give me guardrails and structure anymore. I have to create my own structure. And so you do. You report into the graphics office every day at 9 a.m., and you learn how to use things like Photoshop and the big industrial printer and different print methods like sublimation and direct-to-garment printing. And then slowly, you start to build other parts of a foundation for yourself. You don't just work at the graphic design office, you also decide to start experimenting with cooking. You want something good to bring to the office each day, right? So you start experimenting with making vegan curries in your kitchen, and that becomes a routine in itself. You go to the store, you pick out your ingredients, you make your curry, you eat it, it's delicious, you look forward to it. And unlike those pizzas in the cafeteria, you have full control over these curries. It's not somebody else making them and serving them to you. You're the one who's sourcing the ingredients and making them yourself and sustaining yourself with food that you've made. It's very Star, it's very After the Tower, and that's an illustration of how the tower flows into the star, how after you've lost all of the things that gave you routine, that were externally imposed upon you, now you need to find some sustenance within and be able to build your own foundation. All the while, your friends are doing the same thing. Your friend in college is going to class and building up the skills and the credentials to succeed in her chosen field. Your friend in the military is having military training. Your friend who ran off to Brazil, well, a couple weeks in, he dumped her and now she's back in the US, but she has that life experience of a whirlwind romance that got its start in her Instagram DMs. So you've all taken things into your own hand, and you no longer need those guardrails of that high school schedule to tell you where to go each day and what to do. You're all in more control of your destiny at this point. And in taking some more ownership of that, you're all more capable of giving back to the collective, which is another very star theme. Let's say, for example, your friend who's back stateside, she's not feeling so great after being dumped, and she needs a good friend and a hot meal. She comes to your house, and you serve her up a bowl of your homemade vegan curry. She loves it, and she's so happy to connect with you and be sustained by your friendship and the food that you cooked from scratch. Then it's holiday break. Your college friend heads home too, and she wants to reconnect. She wants to hang out. So you invite her over. Hey, come on by for some vegan curry. And she comes, and over a nice hot bowl of it, you tell her all about your experiences in graphic design. She tells you all about college, and you reconnect, and you have a great time. Your military friend eventually comes home on leave too, and guess what? He comes by, you whip him up a bowl of hot vegan curry, and it's a million times better than anything he could have gotten on the base, and he tells you all about boot camp, and you tell him all about graphic design. You're all in different places and carving your own paths, and none of this would have been possible if you hadn't had that tower moment of graduating high school and being released from the confines of that day-to-day schedule. And if you hadn't all been forced to now pick up the pieces and build the next chapter for yourselves. So, the tower is an end of an era. I think it's worthwhile here to compare it to Death and the World, because those are two other cards that have similar end of an era type themes. One analogy that I use often is that Death is like quitting a job and Tower is like getting fired. It might not be the perfect analogy, but I think it captures this idea of how much control you have in either scenario. To me, Death always felt a lot more internal, and a lot more like you have the agency to do the killing and do the transformation that's necessary, versus the Tower is more external. To me, the Tower often feels more like it's happening to you versus something that you yourself put into motion. Obviously, we're talking very broad strokes here, but I think that for a lot of scenarios, it works. I also think that with Death, there's a bit more of a like-kind exchange going on, because remember, one of the key themes of that card is transformation. It's what needs to die and be gotten rid of in order to make room for something that's new and fresh and overall better for you. There's no such negotiation in the Tower. The Tower is, this is unsustainable, this isn't working, this is going whether you like it or not and whether you're ready for it or not, and you're gonna have to figure out what comes next. I think that puts the Tower's theme a bit closer to the World's theme, with one huge difference. In both cases, there's an inevitable paradigm shift. Things are changing. But with the Tower, the main theme is, how are you going to pick up the pieces and rebuild from square one? Versus the World, there's no rebuilding and there's no pieces. It's, you're moving on and you're moving up and you're taking all of those lessons you've learned on this journey into the next phase with you. In fact, you might pull the Tower and the World together to symbolize graduating from high school, because while the Tower is that sense of losing the schedule that you've become so accustomed to and moving away from everything that's familiar and everything that you kind of built your life around, the World is, yeah, we're taking these lessons and we're going to apply them elsewhere. So you, working at your graphic design company all day, you might be taking things you learned in high school, like geometry. After all, if you need to print, say, a big sticker, you need to know the angles and how they relate to each other. Or you might use other math skills to price out a client's order or figure out how much materials to buy. You could also pull the Tower and Death together. Heck, you could pull the Tower, Death, and the World all together. That could be a really interesting tarot pull, because think about how it plays with the same theme, but with a few different angles and all the unique nuances from these three cards. I'd obviously read that as a big change is coming, but tied up in that big change coming, I'd probably read into it that the person might be struggling with this idea of, how do I claw back some control over the situation, and the parts of it that I can't control and the parts of it that are happening no matter what, how do I make peace with them? And what bits of it do I need to just let go versus what bits of it do I need to carry with me and incorporate into how I rebuild as I move forward? I don't think you necessarily always have to keep proceeding and following cards. In this case, with the tower, those would be the devil and the star in mind when interpreting a card. But I do think it can always be helpful to think about where is this card coming from and what is it setting me up for. And in this case, where we're reading Death, the Tower, and the world all together, let's keep in mind that in some of those negative spaces, we have cards like the Star and Temperance and even the Fool. So there are a lot of endings, and with them, there are a lot of beginnings, and with those beginnings, a lot of ideas about agency and taking the reins. I know this episode is a bit out of order compared to the format we typically follow, so I didn't want to skip over looking at each piece of this card individually. We talked a bit about the crown being struck off by the lightning and the clouds that are a bit dark and a bit ominous against the scary black background, and the jagged, uneven terrain underneath the tower. The people are free-falling. That's an important thing to keep in mind. They have no control here. All they can do is stare down at the ground and hope for the best. And take a look at where they are in relation to any ground. They actually don't look like they're falling anytime soon onto any ground that's soft or abundant or even present. They kind of, to me, the scale of the figures compared to the tower and the ground implies that the two figures are a lot closer to the viewer than their backdrop is. And to me, it doesn't look like they're anywhere close to the ground. They've got quite a way to free fall here. So with the lack of any kind of visual representation of the element of earth, and I know you could make the argument that the tower and the ground that it's on represents earth, but it's getting pretty wrecked. That says to me that there's nothing for these people to hold on to. There's nothing that's rooting them and supporting them anymore. The thing that did support them is literally getting struck by lightning. I also want to draw your attention to the rest of the elemental representations in this card. We see fire, and as we know, fire is passion and it's action. And we see clouds that symbolize air. So as we know, air is ideas and it's understanding and knowledge. We don't have much in the way of earth, and we also don't have anything in the way of water. Quick recap, water is emotions. What can we read into that here? Perhaps we can read into it that this abrupt change doesn't care about your feelings. In fact, that this change is being brought upon by action and by understanding, not by emotions. This is not an arbitrary thing, and it's not a subjective thing either. The revolution is happening because of what people think about the status quo, and they're motivated by those thoughts. To tie it back to our high school analogy, you're graduating because of the knowledge you've acquired and the actions you've taken. You took your classes, you passed your exams, you know things, there's nothing left at high school for you. I'm deliberately using this high school analogy a lot because I want to emphasize that the tower is a moment of growth, even when it's uncomfortable. I don't want to harp too hard on it, but I do really want to get away from this idea that the tower is an inherently painful, upsetting, reductive thing. It's, yeah, you're losing that schedule and that familiarity, but it's in the context of growing and moving past the restrictions that that familiarity, whatever that thing was, had for you. A similar scenario that could show up as a tower moment that I've actually personally read for someone would be recognizing that you're in a toxic work environment and you're not sure of what to do. Do you quit? Do you stick around and wait for it to all fall apart? In this person's case, the tower came up and I read it for them of, yeah, I think stick it out. I don't think quitting right now is going to be as beneficial to you as just waiting for the whole thing to implode is. So in this context, you could also read the tower as release. And when you drop it into the major arcana, you can see how the devil sets you up for that. If the devil is all about restriction and control and the things that keep you bound up, The Tower is about these things finally becoming too much to bear and imploding. It's that high-paying job that has you in golden handcuffs, having its creditors call in their debts and then having to fold because there just isn't enough capital to pay those. It's finally realizing that the false promises that have been made to you are in fact false, and being released from the mindset that those false promises put you into. Perhaps because, remember, the devil is Capricorn, so Capricorn is ambition and striving for more and more material wealth, even at the expense of your mental and spiritual well-being. The Tower is Mars. Mars is the bellicose planet. I think we can read that lightning strike as symbolic of Mars taking action against everything that Capricornian ambition built. You're not safe in your tower anymore because that tower is being struck down. So if the tower is Mars and it strikes down everything that is binding you up and keeping you dependent on the old systems, the star is the ushering in of the new systems. It's what comes after the revolution. It's after we've deposed the monarchy. This is our new parliament. Pay attention to the elements here, too, between the tower and the star. The tower happened against a very air element backdrop. Look at all those clouds. So you could read that as the tower is happening because of what do we know to be true. Then it ushers in the star, which is Aquarius, an air sign, and as we see from that ibis in the backdrop, the star is ruled by wisdom. Aquarius isn't just about making changes for the sake of making changes, it's because Aquarius observed the facts present in their environment and then chose to build an environment that better reflected reality. So that's about it for our discussion on the tower today. I hope you learned something, and I hope that now when the tower comes up in readings that you do, you're a little less intimidated by it. If you were intimidated to begin with, maybe you weren't, but I know sometimes people are. We are also down to just one more major arcana card, and conveniently, one more Thursday in 2024. Tune in next week for our discussion about judgment. And in the meantime, if you like what you hear, give me a follow over on Instagram. My handle is its_OMG_tarot. Catch you over there. And to everybody celebrating this holiday season, I wish you a blessed Yule, a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a Happy Kwanzaa, and a Happy New Year. Although, we'll talk again before New Year's. So, catch you soon, and I wish you and your loved ones a wonderful holiday season. Bye-bye.